I want to go back to the on camera brawl in '88, just because there's so much that got so much attention. Just a little bit the background and the circumstances.
Well, very simply, the neo-Nazi movement, the skinhead movement, was really taking off. There were conventions held around the country. There were radio stations that were allowing, hate speech. A lot of gross anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism and racism were the kind of foundations of it. And I guess the genesis of the idea is that there became a faction of the skinhead movement who didn't appreciate the anti-Semitism or the racism, but they liked the macho biker, the trappings, the accoutrements of that kind of fascist approach. And we had the idea to bring those, the non-racist skinheads, in with some of the more notorious skinheads. But I have to tell you that at that point, I was actively. I've always been a brawler, street person. I always thought that was my great strength. The source of my physical courage was. I had more fights than Jerry Clooney, and he was the heavyweight champ on television. I just styled myself as a kind of a wise guy, and I was a boxer at that time, in training, and so I had an attitude and almost a knowledge that push was going to come to shove, that something was going to happen. Because I remember I wore my combat boots.
On that particular program?
On that particular program. I wore my combat boots, and I specifically told the guards what I had told every cameraman I'd ever worked with: don't interrupt the fight unless I'm losing. And so when it happened, it was. If you look at the program, you'd see the clear building of tension. It's almost like a backyard brawl. You can see how it's evolving, and then it just, there's the catalyst. One guy touches another guy, and then it became just a vivid example of mob violence, I guess, and my mob against their mob. And ultimately, the cops came in. We were in Times Square studios. It didn't take long for the cops to get there. They just came in from outside. And it became the most watched episode of my program, and it propelled that talk show to, that talk show could still be on if I wanted it to be. I closed that talk show. It had a 4 rating. A 4 rating now, that's more than twice as big as Anderson is now, right. Or Ellen. It's just huge, but I just didn't want to do it anymore. But the fight itself was absolutely pure, in the sense that we didn't rig it, we didn't preordain the outcome. Once the violence happened, even the violence was in its own way cathartic. It revealed them to be who they were, because they threw the chair, and they were dirty fighters, and revealed us to be who we were, the champions, as we portrayed ourselves, as we saw ourselves, which is more important than how we portrayed ourselves, as the champions of the lesser, of the evils. And it was what it was. I'll always live with it. It's like Al Capone's vault. I'm sure that, or I was certain, Willowbrook aside, that it was going to be my tombstone. I opened Al Capone's vaults, and I got my nose broken in a brawl with the skinheads.
We spoke before about O.J. Simpson and your coverage of the trial. Briefly, your coverage of the Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton story was huge. And what was your approach to that story?
Well, my whole approach to that story was very simple. All men lie about getting blowjobs. That's the truth of it. And I knew the Republicans who were attacking the president lied about their blowjobs. He lied about his blowjob. And there are senators today lying about their blowjobs. So when I reduced it to a blowjob, and I saw that half of the government was trying to bring down the other half of the government using the historic impeachment process for only the second time successfully, as I understand it, this was a catastrophe in the making that I refused to allow to happen. It was a mob wanting to lynch the president, and you check out the progressives, the left wing, the liberals, and how they went along with it. They all took that same ride. Bill Clinton was doomed. And I said, we've got his back. And remembering that I had the #1 rated show on CNBC, we had a formidable weapon. And alone in the mainstream media, we stood for the president and said, no way we're going to let you take this man out. So Ken Starr became, fair game, the prosecutor. All of Newt Gingrich, with his hypocrisy, became fair game. And every shot they took at Bill Clinton, I used their same standard of proof against them. And I did it knowing that the vast majority of minorities in this country, blacks and Latinos, totally identify with the president. That he had a core of support, even in his worst days, even when maybe in his own mind he thought he was going. And just, we beat him up so bad. I really believe that that's when it came time finally for those senators to vote. They could not vote impeachment.
And Roger Ailes supported you. And Roger... Oh.
When we get that, we can't...
No objection.
Wait.
I'm sorry. All right.
Let's go for it.
And Roger Ailes had no objections to the way you covered that story.
Au contraire, because it's one of history's little ironies that Roger Ailes, who hired me and basically watched that program flourish and made CNBC a powerhouse, Roger did, in his genius, this little sleepy cable show, or cable network, had already left to form Fox News. Right. So Roger came here in 2006, 2007. He was making Fox News a powerhouse by attacking the president. I mean, that was part of Roger's... He set his sights on Bill Clinton, the 42nd president. 43rd president. He was going to take him down. They went wild. In fact, I had a fight with O'Reilly my first day here, 2006, 2007. They were going wild here, and from 2008 when the impeachment process really got going. And I took the opposite tack, and the two of us were kind of titans banging it out, me against my old boss. But the president prevailed, as he should have. It was not an impeachable offense. He could have been chastised in some way that was totally humiliating without putting the nation through that trauma. Yeah. Because I really believe that Monica Lewinsky is the reason we didn't intervene in Rwanda. I think it's the reason we started the bombing campaign against Saddam Hussein. I think that Monica Lewinsky really, that whole affair and how it led to the divided government we have now, I think all the suspicion about politicians, it was one of the worst chapters in American history. I'm very proud to have stood with the president. I am beyond delighted that, and Bill Clinton was the 42nd president, I am beyond delighted that he defeated the impeachment. And I lament the fact that he goes down in history along with Andrew Johnson as the only other president impeached. It was such an abusive process.
Did he ever subsequently talk to you about your coverage?
Sure. It's funny, I can't say the Clintons, unlike John Lennon, the Clintons never embraced me publicly. much to my chagrin, I have to say, because having been, I think, instrumental in saving his ass, I would have expected more generosity of spirit, greater access, but I never really got it. But he did call, and I've seen him plenty of times, and he invited me to the inauguration of his library, and he never enters a room without saying hello to me and all that, but he just never did the big sit-down interview with me, nor did the Secretary of State, the current Secretary of State, his wife, Hillary. But he did call me in the immediate aftermath of the Senate vote. And without revealing any confidences, I'll give you the setting. My niece, Andrea, was dying of cancer in New York Presbyterian Hospital. I forget what they call it now. I think that's what they call it. It used to be Columbia Presbyterian, now the big place.
Right.
I actually live right across the river at Edgewater, one of my houses there. But so he called me as I was with Andrea, who only had at that point weeks to live. So here we're getting a call from the President of the United States in her room, and I get it on my phone, and so I just started interviewing him over the phone, and Andrea loved it, and so I'll never forget that. I didn't put him on the phone with her. I should have, in retrospect, but it was quite a moment.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to your coming over to Fox after 9/11. First of all, where were you on 9/11?
Well, I have to say that.
And how did it impact you?
9/11 changed my life as profoundly as Willowbrook did. Much more than Al Capone's vaults, much more than the broken nose. Those were just kind of a continuation of a theme. 9/11 was different because everything I had built professionally in my life was uprooted by 9/11, as surely as if that plane had hit my building. I was at CNBC. I had the highest rated show on the network. My office in Fort Lee was intentionally made 1 foot bigger in all its dimensions than Tom Brokaw's office, because Tom Brokaw represented, again, the news establishment at NBC, but I was the one that getting the ratings. So although he was successful in keeping me off the nightly news, he had no control over either my Dateline specials or the fact that I controlled CNBC, so they gave me this vast office. Not only that, but by then I had met Erica, my young and beautiful now wife, and although she couldn't stay on staff, I met her through, she was a producer for someone else, but I met her through CNBC. And she couldn't stay on staff, but they gave her a freelance position and allowed her to travel with me, and we had a house in Malibu. So here I was with a much younger, fantastically beautiful wife, with a house on the beach in Malibu, a house in New York, living a life where everything was first class. You know, I stayed at the best hotels. Erica's first class travel accompanying me was paid for by the network. And you know, I could do any story I wanted. You know, witness Clinton or Simpson, or I think Gary Condit was the big story of that year, 2001. But I happened to be, because of my flamboyant lifestyle, in bed in Malibu when the towers got hit. My kids, my then, let's see, how old would she be? She was first grader. My first grader and my third grader were with their mom in the townhouse I had just bought for them on 93rd and Park, near Spence, their school. I immediately got on the phone, couldn't get through to see how they were, because I got a phone call, turn on the Today Show, and there it was all happening. I immediately tried to reach my ex-wife, see how my kids were doing. Couldn't get through. I called the desk, let me in on this story, we'll go live from here. No response. In fact, they preempted the network and put Brokaw on CNBC. I think MSNBC was already labeled MSNBC, and the NBC network. So Brokaw was on all of NBC's outlets. preempted. I couldn't get on the air. I couldn't get home to see how my children were. I was absolutely traumatized. I ultimately came home through Canada and Connecticut and finally got in and got on. It happened early in the week, and by Thursday or so I was on the air. But then I said, when it became clear that it was an attack, an Al-Qaeda attack, and that Afghanistan was the base of the terrorists who launched the attack. And we lost 6 dads. Before they moved to 93rd Street, we were living when we were married, I was living with my family in Rumson, New Jersey. They went to Rumson Country Day. We lost 6 dads from Rumson Country Day. It was all, Cantor Fitzgerald was based in Middletown. Mm-hmm. Again, the per capita was the worst area to be hit by 9/11. So I had this rage, this frustration that I wasn't being allowed to tell the story, and this rage at the people who had done this, who killed so many of my friends and neighbors. I said, I've got to go to Afghanistan. I've been there before. I did drug specials there. I'm the only one that knows the tribal territories, the Khyber Pass. Mm-hmm. I've got to go. You've got to let me go. No. We have war correspondents. We have that. You have the #1 rated show. You have to stay here. So I picked up the phone. I called Roger Ailes, who was at Fox News, and I said, if I get out of my deal here, will you make me a war correspondent? Will you give me a job? As war correspondent, not as an anchor. And he said yes. And almost exactly 10 years ago, November 14th, 2001, I started here. And November 16th, 2001, I was in Islamabad. And November 17th, I was in the Khyber Pass. And then I was the war correspondent for Fox News. And now it's 10 years later.
So, speak a little bit more about your transition to Fox, your reception here.
Well, my first appearance was with Bill O'Reilly, and he said, do you understand how badly you've damaged your career and your credibility by sticking up for Bill Clinton? And I said, I don't know how you could say I've damaged my
credibility. He said this privately to you?
No, he said this on the air.
Uh-huh.
And I said, how could I have damaged my credibility? I was the #1 rated show on CNBC. Everybody watched my show. I was beating Fox News. I wasn't at the end. Hannity passed me, but I was the arch enemy here for that reason. And anyway, I had that argument with O'Reilly, and we have never really made up since. We were on together every Friday, and we still are at war a decade later. And everyone else could not have been more gracious, from Roger down. And with Bill also, there's also a collegial spirit there. He's very respectful, and even in his own grumpy way, affectionate.
But why would that endure some of that tension? Is it because it's just of that, specifically the Clinton thing, or?
That epitomized everything that made us different. I mean, O'Reilly's worldview is 180 degrees from my worldview. Certainly on some issues. I mean, some issues we agree, but the vast majority of them, he sees the world. He sees himself as a culture warrior, and I see myself, if that's the terms of his self-definition, then I'm the enemy, by definition. But that doesn't mean we can't go to the ball game together, or holiday parties, or donate to each other's charities. And I really think the world of him, in a sense that he's the most successful cable news broadcaster ever. And he's an enduring success. And there are no accidents in long-term success like O'Reilly's, or mine. I mean, there's got to be something there. After 42 years, I'm not playing the angles anymore, if I ever did.
Okay. All right. Going back to the becoming a war correspondent.
Oh, just want to say one other thing about. I described the snobbiness of other news organizations at NBC, led by Brokaw, at ABC, led by Peter Jennings, and I could tell you a great story about Peter Jennings also, toward the end there. But coming here was exactly the opposite. Everyone rushed to welcome me. Even though I was an obvious left-wing, progressive, ex-radical, long-haired, ethnic, activist, I was embraced and respected and warmly welcomed, and it really is something that persists to this day. Although I've arguably never been more out of sync with my colleagues in terms of the way we see the world, I've never been more warmly embraced. from Roger on down. So I really appreciate that about Fox News. But the war has, I started to say how is the life-changing episode equaling Willowbrook. It was the war. I could get as emotional if I talk in depth about it. Having been so close to so many soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who died. It really. I feel like I live with a post-traumatic stress disorder. I feel much more twitchy. Having survived so many near-death experiences now, I feel, affected in a very profound way to see so much of America's resources, spent in some cases so badly. See so many young, promising, wonderful young men and some women even getting cut down or injured. It's really, and for a cause that's so ambiguous. It's really been a terrible decade in terms of psychological impact and the emotional cost. It's impossible to understate how. Take Libya. Libya was nuts in terms of bullets and explosions and violence and death, and you come home from that, and then I've got the tapestry meeting at the school. We got to talk about how we get a more diverse class next year, or we got to fundraise, and what are you gonna be for Halloween? It's a very jarring juxtaposition, and it's gonna be scars that, like Vietnam, last through the lifetime of us folks.
Do you want to say a word about the friendly fire incident in December of 2001?
Sure. I'd love to. It was the biggest scandal to affect me in Tora Bora, to affect my immediate life and times, and I'm very, very bitter about it for a lot of reasons. But the main allegation was that there was a friendly fire incident in Kandahar, 300 miles from Tora Bora. And the allegation was I claimed that I was at that incident in Kandahar when I was at Tora Bora. The story, which ran originally in the Baltimore Sun, was picked up by everybody. And the reason it had such legs is because Roger, and this is the one issue that he knows that I'm extremely bitter about to this day, said that I could not say anything about it. He was of the opinion that it was a ridiculous story. I was 300 miles away. Why would I say I was in Kandahar when I was in Tora Bora when everybody in the world knows I was in Tora Bora because I was on live every hour? Why would I say I was at that friendly fire incident if I wasn't, knowing that I'd inevitably be exposed? We had an awful friendly fire incident in Tora Bora the day before, and I had an innocent confusion that I remember I had no AP wire, I had no source communications with New York, except when we were on the Bird, those limited times we were on the Bird. And I made an innocent mistake, and I was portrayed as Simon Legree. It was worse than, the comedians, the late night comedians made fun of me. Conan did, Leno did, every radio talk show host, every cable outlet. They went on and on about how I was defaming the name of the warriors by putting myself in harm's way, which was an absolute lie. And Fox investigated, and I tried to get the word out, but nobody was really interested. By the time I could talk, by the time I decided to talk about it, and I made the mistake, I should have written about it immediately, and I could have easily debunked it very quickly. But it was out there, and I feel so angry about it to this day. It is a typical story written by a total nebbisha asshole who never risked anything in his life, never put his ass on the line for anything, never had to be courageous in anything, who wrote that story and defamed me in a way that I will never forgive, nor will I ever forget. I'm very, very bitter and angry about it to this day. That story was absolute bullshit. And I could have sued, I could have done a million things. Ironically, though, the Baltimore Sun was owned by my Sun is owned by my old partners at Tribune. So that also blunted my rage. I mean, I was going to go attacking people who had been so good to me, who made my fortune for me. I mean, whatever money I have saved is from those. Anyway, I feel, in a sense, a lot of my courage since then has been based on, this is the book your colleague asked why I never wrote a follow-up to my 1990 memoir. I wanted to write about that episode, but it's A, I never did. B, it was, I don't know, it seems such a small story in a sense. It's, everybody now who was there knows that in Tora Bora we had more friendly fire incidents than any place else in the country. It was the most intense combat, the most intense aerial bombardment. We killed the friendlies almost as effectively as we killed the enemy. We have on tape my own friendly fire remarks at the time. We have the tape from that day, the day that story broke, the day I misstated that I was at the friendly fire incident. It's the same day I almost got killed, and the bullet just almost. But my point is, since then I've wanted to cleanse the stain of that by showing the most flamboyant disregard for danger ever shown on camera. I've been in more perilous, potentially deadly situations than any well-known journalist since Ernie Pyle. Nobody can match me for risking bodily harm more flamboyantly. Nobody. I've had more bullets whizzing around my head. I've been closer to more explosions more often than anybody that you ever know. 10 times more than Anderson Cooper or, you name them. Anybody, and yeah, I've got the tape to prove it. But my point is that the reason that I pushed the envelope, Libya being the most recent example, so aggressively is I wanted to cleanse myself of the sin of Tora Bora, of the stigma of Tora Bora, by showing that nobody is braver than me, nobody risks more than me. I would never lie about being in combat that I wasn't in, and I almost was courting death with my boots on as the ultimate redemption. And it's funny, when you have absolute courage like that, when nothing matters but pushing as hard as you can. Mogadishu, Somalia was crazy. And if you don't die, you get great stuff. And I've been able to come home with great stuff.
Another controversy, the map in the sand in Iraq.
Oh, it was such petty horseshit.
Briefly.
Well, I was on live, and I wanted to explain where the various units were, so I drove a map of Iraq in the sand. Iraq is the size of Texas, so you can get an idea of the scale. And bear in mind that every network or cable news outlet had the big maps with the telestrators and the electronic this and that. So I drew a map in the sand, and I said, all right, we're going through here. There's Baghdad. I think they're going to go there. Anyway, some civilian in the Pentagon said I was giving away state secrets. I was with the 101st Airborne. We were on the outskirts of Baghdad, west of Baghdad. We were already probing inside in the capital city, and so it became another mess. It was just so stupid. And in that case, my ass was saved by the soldiers. Because in the same way that I maintain for the record that no one has more raw courage than I do in combat, I think that you could say no one is more popular with the GIs than I am. You know, I just got Civilian of the Year. You see that flag there. But that's one of many things. I'm going to lead the Army pep rally at the Pentagon before the Navy game on the 9th of December. I've been with more bases, more GIs, and pictures. The reason they love me is because I live with them. I love I love them, their families. I've been telling their story now for 10 years. And risking what they risk. And pointing out their hardships and how they get screwed. 22-year-old kid with a pregnant wife and a 1-year-old spending a year abroad, getting $22,000 a year for it, when his life's in danger. So that the line in the sand and Tora Bora, the friendly fire, are of a piece. They are two stories generated by civilians who have no earthly idea of what it's like to be in combat. And the GIs, every service, they recognize it. You see all the pictures of me and the various soldiers, and you got a picture there of me and
General Petraeus.
General Petraeus, General Campbell, but it's more than them. This is good. This is General Petraeus, but the one you want to look at is me and the airman who's dead now. Here, back up. There, see, it's on the wall. You have to see it. But me standing with guys that are dead now. I mean, that's the reality of it. The reality is that, living this war for 10 years has been, both those incidents. And it's like we don't report houses that don't burn. That's the reporters. But you're guilty of that also, because you're not asking me about all the stories I've done with the GIs that they loved and I loved, and told the story, the extraordinary story of their courage and sacrifice in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been 10 deployments in Afghanistan, 10 deployments in Iraq, Somalia, Lebanon, Gaza, every shithole in between. We've risked a lot and paid a tremendous price for it. It's not like covering the Pentagon. It's not like covering Occupy Wall Street. It's real. When you're out there at the point of the spear, where death is the commodity, you can't synthesize that, and you can't fake courage, nor can you fake the trust that the people in uniform have for you. You either have it or you don't have it.
Earlier on, you said you were going to tell us a Peter Jennings story. I don't know if this was in connection with your coming over to Fox.
No. I was already at Fox. We were in Baghdad. Jennings was there and Brian Williams was there. And they were doing various stories. I forget what the news peg was. It might have been the start of the first surge. But I don't remember the exact reason that the anchors were all there. But Brian Williams, Peter Jennings, and I all together were leaving on the same C-130. We're flying out of Baghdad. Baghdad is under siege. It's the worst of the war. We're about to fly out. I could tell you about the flight out where we had a missile alert and all the rest of it, and who got to sit where. But at some point, Brian Williams says to me, "I hate that guy, but he's being very nice to me," indicating Peter Jennings.
Right.
And I said, "I hate him too, but he's being nice to me too." And it was very interesting that we all, then chatted. We got on the C-130. We took off. We had to head toward Mosul because it was, for some reason, they feared missile attacks south of Baghdad. We did the ride. It was Peter Jennings and I got the front seats because we were older. I claim seniority. So we sat in the cockpit and Brian was back in the back. We took off and we left. And when we landed, it was only a couple of days later that we heard that Peter Jennings announced that he was dying of cancer. Mm-hmm. So I haven't spoken to Brian about it since then, but I think that Peter Jennings was coming to grips with, he wanted to, in some way, even whatever scores he had out there, whatever You know, it just seemed to me that he was saying he was sorry for snubbing me. It just seemed to me that way. I mean, at least that's the way I portrayed it in my own mind.
Very briefly, Geraldo at large, how did it differ from other shows that you had done in the past? And I want to quickly ask you, I think that's when the Michael Jackson interview took place.
I think I've been doing the same show from the beginning. I don't think I'm doing that much different stuff than I did at Eyewitness News 40-odd years ago. I'm still the same. I still have my own point of view. I'm still this weird mix of data gatherer and conduit of data from point A to point B, and opinion meister or editorialist. And I've always been forgiven that by my bosses, whether Roger, another titanic figure in my life, Rune. It's been my good fortune that I've been given the latitude to talk, but be a reporter and to be a commentator at the same time. And At Large is just another one of those manifestations of Geraldo meets the news. Michael Jackson was.
How did you get this
fascinating to me? Michael Jackson is someone I had met previously, prior to the initial molestation allegations in 1993. So the molestation charges, the original in 93 and the 2005 in Santa Barbara, California, that period between 93 and 2005, I did not speak to Michael at all, although I knew him in the earlier days when he was the hottest interview in the world. But I never interviewed, but I did speak with him. When I got to him in 2005, it was because I think it was his brother Randy said there's more to this story than meets the eye, and he became my source along with Joe Jackson, the dad. And they pointed out a couple of things to me in 2005. They pointed out, for example, actually it was prior to the trial, so I'd say 2003 through 2004. Although he was already under investigation and they thought he'd be charged. They pointed out to me that the 2005 complaining witness was represented by the same lawyer as the complaining witness in 1993. That the psychologist in 2005 was the same psychologist in 1993. That the victim seemed to be saying almost verbatim what the transcript in the earlier case, which was settled out of court, the 1993 charge. So, and pointed out also that the purported victim in 2005 was a child who was a cancer victim who was physically infirm, and that Michael had access to, this guy in Penn State had access to dozens and dozens of children. Why would he settle on this cancer victim? So I started pointing out why I thought the case could be flawed, the case against him flawed. And so Randy or Dad made a meeting with me and Michael, and I met him at Neverland Ranch, and then again in Encino in the Valley. And the third time I brought my camera, and they said no interview then, but get to know him more, hang out with him more, and I became his confidant in the weeks and months leading up to the trial, when he was becoming increasingly isolated and insulated. And I got to meet him and spend time with him in a way that was like John Lennon, in a sense. I got to know everything about him. He came to trust me, and I was with him when he was just him and watching the two little children. I was with him, and it was just him alone, pondering his fate and bemoaning his fate. We walk and talk, and I just got to know him, and sometimes he behaved in a very bizarre fashion, and other times he was kind of very melancholy, sometimes just crazy. And I finally convinced him to do the interview, but then just before the interview I got a call from his lawyer, who was with the judge in the case, and they said, if I asked him anything about the case, he would be convicting himself, and Tom Mesro, the lawyer, and he would take action against me, blah, blah. Make a long story short, before I got to do the interview, I was given the admonition that I couldn't talk about the allegations. But I got to know Michael, and just like Clinton, in the sense that Clinton never showed his gratitude in an obvious way, in an on-camera interview or access. So too Michael Jackson, but Michael just kind of disappeared after he was acquitted, and so the intimate friendship lasted as long as the verdict.
Right. All right, a couple of just final, more general questions. The biggest changes you've seen in broadcast news over the years?
The biggest change in broadcast news by far is the democratization of the news business. It was just ABC, NBC, CBS when I started. Now, there are infinite medium to give you the information from every conceivable point of view. Not just the cable channels, but the internet has really made everyone a reporter. Everyone's got a little flash cam now, or they use their iPhone or their BlackBerry. Everyone's a reporter. Occupy Wall Street is a classic example of that. Now a Willowbrook story would be easy to do if there was a Willowbrook. You'd have every parent going in to see their kid with a little hidden camera. It would be easy. And I think that you have much more information now than you used to, although many of the reporters are really repeaters. They just take a New York Times story and make it their own. There is enough new material coming out, like the Syrian uprising or the Arab Spring, whatever you call it. I had 3 run-ins with various protesters on Occupy Wall Street. There were 100 different versions of it on YouTube within the hour. So that's the biggest change. That everybody can be a reporter.
Despite all the different forms of news out there, did you break the story of Osama bin Laden's death? Were you the first to?
I was the first.
And
at 10:39, I was the first broadcast outfit. Although the rumors on the internet had been from. Remember, the president said he was going to speak to the nation in the 9 o'clock hour. He said he was going to speak to the nation at 10 o'clock. So why in the world is the president going to speak to the nation at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night? So right away you knew it was something big, and probably something that had to do with national security. So then you start thinking about what in the world could it be? Could it be Gaddafi? Remember, the war in Libya is just now getting going, and it's the violence, and Gaddafi is being portrayed as the boogeyman. And then we started thinking about it more and more and said, he wouldn't talk to the nation about killing Gaddafi on a Sunday night. I mean, that could certainly wait until Monday morning. It has to be something bigger than that. And then the internet was abuzz with Osama bin Laden. And so I opined shortly after 10:30, the president kept delaying his appearance, that it was Osama. And then at 10:39, our Chad Pergram, our producer in Capitol Hill, he confirmed from 2 Senate sources that it was Osama. So I looked like a sage. But really, the original rumors got going exactly as I suggested, with everyone being a reporter. It was the internet that really led the charge and gave people the feeling that they could speak out, even though it was that they could be a source, and attributed the story. But we definitely were the first. We beat CNN we were 39, I think CNN was 45, and NBC right around there. We beat them pretty good.
All right, just some sort of summing up.
And I was delighted. It was, being a war correspondent, it was like, to tell that story, given how that piece of shit had fucked up my life for 10 years and hurt me so bad with the victimization of my innocent friends and neighbors. It was such a cathartic experience for me. It was a triumph. I took it personally. And then to leave the studio when Brett Baer came in and took over at the anchor, Fox News, I went to the White House and I was on live until 5 in the morning, body surfing that crowd, that adoring crowd of mostly college kids. It was an exquisite night. Yeah. And the irony is, I had introduced my wife to the president the night before, and he was a cool cucumber at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, didn't give away anything. And that's the day that they were supposed to take him out. The mission was scrubbed because of weather. But I had amazing respect for Barack Obama's ability to crack jokes about Donald Trump and be so too cool for school, and then have that secret that he would reveal to the world the next day.
Yeah. In general, in your journey from the Young Lords to Fox, what has stayed constant in terms of your social and political views, and what has changed?
Remember I mentioned Migrants Dirt Cheap, the immigration special in 1973, and how important Harvest of Shame was for that. I'm still that same person. I still have the same advocacy. I write a column every week. You might want to check it out on Fox News Latino that really takes my championing of the immigrant population, the undocumented population, really crystallizes it, makes it very clear. But I haven't changed much. I think that if I have any regrets, and it's very difficult at this late stage to change anything, that's why I wouldn't want to be a time traveler, because you don't want to affect if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been this and that. But I'm sorry I wasn't more critical of Iraq. I'm sorry that I became a cheerleader. It's very difficult, not just at Fox News, if you just look at every correspondent. It was very difficult to stand in the way of that patriotic drumbeat. When the nation is going to war, whatever your misgivings, you've got to put them aside. And I'm sorry that I didn't do more.
Was it particularly difficult being at Fox? Even
well,
more
I don't
difficult?
know, because this is where I was. But
yeah.
If you look at the reports, I think it's be an interesting exercise. I haven't done it, but just the casual viewing that I have done, I don't see a whit of difference, particularly in the early years. I think that from the invasion of Iraq in '03 until very late in the game, up until the surge, I think, and a lot of it had to do with embedding. The fact that you became a soldier or a Marine in a sense temporarily, that you were reporting on your platoon, your squad, and it was a brilliant way to mute criticism in many ways. I think it's up until Abu Ghraib, anyway, until Abu Ghraib.
All right, so you've indicated that regret, the biggest regret in terms of Iraq. What about your proudest achievement in your career?
In my entire career?
In your entire career.
Oh, boy. That's...
Would it be Willowbrook or something else?
Well, I think that, only half comically, I taught America that the G in Geraldo, or the G in Spanish, is pronounced H. So I think that broadening people's expectations of what Latinos are capable of has been an important part. I mean, that the non-story aspects of my career have been socially important, I think, for the country. I came to define an era in to some small way. But Willowbrook is a story that cannot be replicated, and is the consummation and the culmination of the dream of what any young reporter aspires to, in the sense of making a difference. So beyond the shadow of a doubt, that story is what I hope comes to define my half-century in public life. It's, I changed. I think I changed the news business. I made it more mobile. I don't think you even had walking shots or walking stand-ups before I came to Eyewitness News. The combination of advocacy and reporting, I think I blazed that trail as well. I think I was a translator for a generation of Americans. I'm very proud of that, too. I've done a lot of good work, and certainly standing shoulder to shoulder with people in uniform has been an important aspect of it. But pride in honor and courage and dignity and being able to take care of my family and a lot of other people, being a philanthropist now. I mean, those are. I'm proud of where I've come. You know, I take off. You know, I take off in a plane. A lot of them funky planes, taking off from funky places, and you worry if the wing's going to fall off, if someone's going to shoot you down. And I have a little drill I do. Well, what if I died now? It would be okay. You know, I'm okay.
As a public person, what do you think is there something that is most misunderstood about you, or surprising about you that, say, the public maybe doesn't fully understand?
Well, you know, most people who watch television are casual viewers. They tune in, they kind of go with the flow. So whatever the conventional wisdom of the day is, most people, it's conventional wisdom because it's assumed or adopted by most people. So my reputation kind of goes with whatever the latest story is. But I have to say, walking around, military bases aside, that's a special case, but walking around any city or town in this country, everyone over the age of 25 recognizes me. Everyone. It's 100% recognition. The bus driver, the cop, the model, or the businessman or the official. And invariably the welcome is intimate. Geraldo, hey, I remember I watched you from the this and that, and they all have a different signpost of where they met me. But the relationship is personal. It's almost like, even though I speak to hundreds of thousands or millions of people at a given time, it's an intimate relationship. Some don't like me, but the vast majority are very positive, very polite, very warm, very gracious. I think I could be invited to almost every living room in America, and people would tell me their stories or want to hear my stories, and they care about my family, they care about how I'm feeling, how I'm looking, what I'm wearing. They disagree or they agree, but I think going back to your original question, what is my proudest achievement? It is my relationship with the American viewing audience now. I think it is set in stone that no critic, I'm on maybe my 20th generation of TV critics now. And how many do you remember?
All right, two last questions. First of all, what advice would you give to an aspiring television journalist?
I do a lot of mentoring. I just did mentoring Monday at Leonia High School in New Jersey. It was a packed crowd there. Liz Klayman, my colleague from Fox Business, was there. Marvin Kittman, the columnist, a couple of other people in the business. And I tell them, and I tell everybody, the only real journalism education is doing journalism. You've got to do it. And every executive producer I ever had started as an intern. So my advice is get practical experience. Learn the history. Learn the code of ethics. All those things are extremely important, but also most important is learn what is capable, what your capabilities are in terms of telling a story. You've got to be a writer. You've got to be willing to experience what it is you're writing or speaking about. Don't go for the glamour side of it. If you have that charisma, that'll come into play also. But learn the nuts and bolts of it. Never be too big to carry your own cables or your own camera, your own tripod. Have courage, and tell the story straight. But tell it from the way you see it. Don't try to tell it from the point of view of Peter Jennings or anybody else.
And finally, what do you think is your legacy in television news? How would you define it?
Well, my legacy will be written by somebody else. But I believe, in terms of television journalism, the legacy is that the reporter is the most important person in the team. It's not the anchorman. They're the glamour pusses, in a sense. Nobody ever got famous by what happened in the studio. You could be an anecdote, like the brawl with the neo-Nazis, but it's the stories that you tell, that you're willing to suffer to get. That's the legacy, that the reporter is the star in journalism, not the team back in the studio.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.